The 1970s Farm Belt was a battlefield, but the weapons weren't tanks or missiles. They were tractors. International Harvester, John Deere, and Allis-Chalmers were locked in what farmers still call the Horsepower Wars, a high-stakes race to dominate American agriculture. Every year brought bigger, bolder machines, each promising to help farmers work more acres in less time. But in the race for raw power, things didn't always go as planned. And when manufacturers pushed the limits too far, it was farmers who paid the price. Today we're diving into the untold story of one of the most respected diesel engines ever built, the International Harvester DT-466. Though it would go on to earn a legendary reputation in trucks and equipment, its early turbocharged versions left many farmers with costly breakdowns and unfinished fields. The story begins in the early 1970s. An International Harvester was feeling the pressure. John Deere had just launched its 6030 series, a monster of a tractor pushing past 175 horsepower. That was a bold move in the high horsepower market, and it didn't go unnoticed. IH knew it needed something just as powerful and fast if it wanted to stay competitive in the most profitable segment of American agriculture. This wasn't just business, it was personal. Across rural America, farm equipment dealerships were often divided by blood-deep brand loyalties. Red, green, or orange machines parked outside the barn told you everything you needed to know about what brand calendar hung in the kitchen. And when it came to flagship tractors, brand loyalty could mean everything, from future implement purchases to the entire fleet. For IH, falling behind in the performance race didn't just mean losing a sale. It meant risking a whole generation of farmers switching brands entirely. As farms grew larger and labor costs pushed operations toward bigger, more efficient machines, the stakes couldn't have been higher. In response, International Harvester began rolling out a new generation of high-horsepower tractors and components, including a bold new diesel platform designed to help them reclaim ground, the DT-466. It would become the centerpiece of IH's effort to stay relevant. But that journey didn't go exactly as planned. Enter the DT-466 diesel engine, a 7.6-liter inline 6-cylinder power plant that would go on to become one of the most respected diesels in American history. Designed and manufactured by International Harvester starting in the early 1970s, the DT-466 wasn't just another engine. It was a leap forward in durability, serviceability, and long-term performance. It featured a wet sleeve design, allowing for easier rebuilds and a sturdy cast iron block that could handle serious internal pressures. From the start, the engine was built to be worked on, not thrown away. It didn't take long for the DT-466 to find a home beyond the fields. The engine quickly became a staple in medium-duty trucks, grain haulers, municipal service vehicles, and school buses across America. It was praised for its balance of torque and efficiency, and for how well it held up under constant use. In the world of fleet maintenance, it earned a reputation as the diesel that just kept running. Mechanics liked it because they could rebuild it in frame. Fleet managers liked it because it could run hundreds of thousands of miles between overhauls. Farmers and truckers alike told stories of these engines clocking 500,000, 800,000, even up to 1,000,000 miles, with little more than consistent maintenance and a careful hand. By the 80s and 90s, the DT-466 had become legendary. It powered everything from international dump trucks and delivery rigs to school buses, silage choppers, and combines. Ask any diesel tech who's been around long enough, and chances are they'll have at least one story about a DT-466 that outlived the vehicle it was bolted into. But back in its early days, before all the praise and legendary status, the DT-466 was still finding its footing. It wasn't yet the engine that would become a fleet favorite. It was a promising new platform that International Harvester was eager to show off. And like many new technologies pushed into production during the high horsepower race, it had its flaws. So what went wrong? How did an engine that would later be known for bulletproof reliability stumble out of the gate? The answer lies in one word: turbocharging. Oh, and real quick, please take a moment to hit that subscribe button. It really helps out my channel. While the DT-466 would eventually prove itself in trucks and industrial equipment, its early years weren't without problems, especially when International Harvester began pushing the limits of turbocharging. In the escalating race to build the most powerful tractors on the market, IH engineers cranked up boost pressure and fuel delivery to squeeze out every last bit of horsepower. But the bottom end of the engine wasn't always ready to handle the extra strain. It's like bolting a supercharger onto a stock engine without upgrading the internals. You might see a big jump in power, but sooner or later something's gotta give. That's exactly what happened with some of the early DT-466 setups, particularly in tractors and equipment where output had already been turned up in the field. The engine block itself was solid, but the internal components were pushed to the edge. The failures came quickly. Farmers and mechanics reported serious internal damage after just a few hundred hours of use. In the worst cases, the crankshaft experienced fatigue-related fractures, snapping under load or twisting out of alignment. The main bearings, which stabilize the crankshaft and manage immense rotational forces, were especially vulnerable to overheating and breakdown, especially when oil flow was marginal under high RPM conditions. And that wasn't all. Under sustained heavy pulling, exhaust gas temperatures often climbed to dangerous levels, especially in tractors that had been tuned up by adjusting the injection pump. Without intercooling or upgraded internals, the engines ran hot and hard. The result? Scored cylinder walls, seized pistons, and in some cases, total bottom-end failure. These issues weren't always due to bad engineering. They were often the result of over-promising performance on a platform that needed more development. The DT-466 was fundamentally sound, but International Harvester was asking too much of it too soon. Tom Wilkins, a third-generation grain farmer from Western Illinois, shared a story that perfectly captures the frustration of the era. My father bought a brand new IH tractor in 1973. We were so proud of it, biggest machine on our road at the time. 3 weeks into harvest, we were pulling the grain cart back to the elevator when there was this terrible knocking sound. Then bang, and complete silence. The crankshaft had literally snapped in half. Dad missed the rest of harvest that year waiting on parts. Stories like Tom's weren't rare. According to the former service manager at Heartland Farm Equipment in Iowa, the failures came fast and clustered. In the spring of '74, we had 7 IH tractors in the shop at once, all with major engine damage. We started stocking crankshafts because the failures were that common. Some of those engines hadn't even hit 500 hours. The farmers were furious. And with good reason. The agricultural calendar doesn't care about backordered parts or downtime. If your tractor breaks during planting or harvest, every lost day cuts into yield, timing, or grain quality. For family farms working with tight margins, these failures weren't just frustrating, they were financially devastating. But here's where the story takes a turn. In many cases, the engines didn't fail all on their own. Farmers, always looking for ways to get more out of their equipment, discovered they could boost performance by adjusting the injection pump. A quick tweak with a wrench could unlock another 20 or 30 horsepower almost instantly. The results were impressive, until they weren't. What many didn't realize, and what IH engineers likely underestimated, was that the engines were already operating dangerously close to their mechanical limits from the factory. Increasing fuel delivery and boost pressure pushed internal temperatures and stresses to unsustainable levels. Exhaust gas temps soared. Crankshafts, already under heavy strain, began to fatigue. Bearings overheated. Piston crowns cracked or seized in their bores, and the repairs weren't cheap or quick. Jerry Kaufman, a retired IH mechanic from Nebraska, didn't mince words. Those engines were already running on the ragged edge from the factory. When farmers turned them up, they were basically signing the engine's death warrant. But you couldn't blame them. Everybody was doing it. IH should have built the engines to take it. By the mid-1970s, word had gotten around. The early turbocharged engines from International Harvester were starting to earn a less than stellar reputation. For dealers, the shift was just as painful. Showrooms that once proudly showcased IH's newest high-power tractors now had to answer to angry customers demanding repairs or refunds. Longtime IH loyalists who'd grown up on red iron were suddenly shopping green or orange. And in an industry where brand loyalty often spanned generations, that kind of switch was nothing short of seismic. Rather than wait for solutions from the factory, many farmers took matters into their own hands. Some worked with trusted mechanics to detune their injection pumps, dialing back the fuel delivery to reduce the stress on the engine's internals. The result was less power, sure, but also fewer cracked crankshafts and burned or scored pistons. Others swapped factory turbos for smaller units that produced gentler boost curves, or installed pyrometers to monitor exhaust gas temps and avoid cooking their cylinders under load. A few even went as far as converting their engines to run without turbochargers at all, trading performance for the peace of mind that came with a naturally aspirated setup. One success story came from the Peterson family in western Minnesota. After 2 catastrophic engine failures in their IH tractor, they partnered with a local mechanic who had experience reinforcing diesel engines used in heavy equipment. Together, they rebuilt the engine with upgraded bearings, improved oil cooling, and a milder turbo setup. The tractor would go on to log more than 12,000 hours in the field, nearly double what many factory-spec machines could handle at the time. But that success didn't come from the engineering department in Chicago. It came from the farmers and mechanics who refused to give up on a machine they'd already invested so much in. While International Harvester would eventually improve its engines in later generations, the damage had already been done. The early missteps in turbocharging had created a trust gap, and in farming, trust is hard to win back once it's lost. Looking back, it's clear that many of the early reliability issues with the DT-466 could have been avoided, not with a total redesign, but with a few strategic improvements that engineers and field mechanics alike would come to recognize in hindsight. The most critical weakness was the crankshaft. While the DT-466's block was fundamentally strong, the rotating assembly wasn't built to handle the kind of stress it was being subjected to, especially in applications where power output had been increased either at the factory or by the farmer. Fatigue cracks began forming at high-stress locations like the fillets near the rod journals and main caps. Reinforcing those areas with a larger radius or added mass could have extended the life of the crank significantly. Closely tied to those failures were the main bearings. These were supposed to stabilize the crankshaft and absorb the intense forces created during combustion, but in too many early engines, they simply couldn't keep up. Prolonged use at high RPMs or under heavy load, especially in machines running without upgraded cooling, caused bearing surfaces to break down. The oil film would collapse, temperatures would spike, and the bottom end would give out. Upgrading the bearing materials, increasing their width, and enhancing the oil flow to those areas would have gone a long way in preventing these kinds of catastrophic failures. But the mechanical strain wasn't limited to what was happening below the pistons. The air entering the engine was another overlooked problem. Many early DT-466s were turbocharged but lacked any form of intercooling. That meant the intake charge was extremely hot by the time it entered the combustion chamber, raising cylinder pressures, combustion temperatures, and the risk of piston crown failure. A properly engineered intercooler system, even a modest one, could have significantly reduced the thermal load on the engine. Cooler air means denser air, which burns more efficiently and more safely. Then there's the matter of tuning. The DT-466 was marketed for its horsepower, and it certainly delivered. But it delivered that power with very little headroom. There wasn't much margin between what the engine was rated for and what it could safely handle long term. A modest rollback in fuel flow or boost pressure, perhaps just 5 to 10%, could have made all the difference. It wouldn't have hurt real-world performance much, but it would have given the engine room to breathe. To make matters worse, these fixes weren't theoretical. They were already being implemented at the dealer level. Mechanics in the field were reinforcing crankshafts, retrofitting intercoolers, upgrading oil pumps, and even installing pyrometers to help farmers monitor exhaust temps and keep things in check. All of these solutions came after the damage had been done, and none of them were particularly expensive or difficult to design into the engine from the beginning. What International Harvester needed wasn't a miracle, it just needed to listen. The engineers who worked closest with customers could see the warning signs early. Farmers were working these machines harder than ever before, and they needed engines that could take that abuse. IH had built a good platform in the DT-466, but in the rush to reclaim their spot in the performance race, they tuned the engine right up to the red line and left little room for error. The story of the DT-466 doesn't end with turbo trouble in the field. In what might be the greatest twist of all, the same engine that once frustrated so many farmers went on to become one of the most respected diesels across America. In medium-duty trucks, school buses, and industrial equipment, the DT-466 found its stride. When it was matched with the right components and tuned for longevity, not just performance, it became a machine that simply refused to quit. Thousands of engines logged more than 20,000 operating hours, or crossed the million-mile mark with nothing more than regular maintenance and a few thoughtful repairs. So what changed? Unlike the early years when marketing pushed engines right to the edge of their limits, later versions of the DT-466 were designed with longevity in mind. Engineers doubled down on the platform's strengths, starting with its massive cast iron block, wet sleeve design, and 7 main bearings that kept everything stable under load. Starting around 1978, IH began rolling out key upgrades. The crankshaft was reinforced with a larger radius at known stress points to prevent the kind of fatigue cracking that had plagued earlier models. Main bearing surfaces were widened and built from more robust materials. Oil passages were reworked to deliver better flow to the areas most vulnerable to heat and wear. And cooling capacity was expanded, with improved water jackets and larger oil coolers to keep internal temps in check, even under heavy use. By 1980, the DT-466B took things even further. The cylinder head was redesigned with stronger valve bridges and better sealing. A large water pump was added, and the thermostat housing was reworked for more consistent coolant flow. Altogether, these upgrades solved the weak spots that had caused so many problems just a few years earlier. And this time, the results stuck. Fleet mechanics reported engines running 300,000 miles without ever needing to remove the valve cover. School districts praised the DT-466 for starting up in sub-zero Midwest winters and running strong in triple-digit desert heat. Truckers knew they could rely on it to pull hard, run cool, and go the distance. And it didn't just last, it ran efficiently. With peak torque available at relatively low RPMs, it got the job done without burning extra fuel or beating itself up in the process. Farmers who had once sworn off IH engines were quietly asking for the DT-466 in their next combine or grain truck. And shop techs, many of whom had spent the early years replacing crankshafts and bearings, were now recommending it as one of the most serviceable, field-ready diesels on the market. Once they stepped back, reinforced what mattered, and let the engine do what it was built to do, it became something much greater. One of the most trusted and enduring diesel engines ever made.